Hi, this is Neil Kelly from the California Adult Education Program Office in Sacramento. And today we'll be doing a fiscal management overview. A lot of details today, a lot of good information. All this information is available on the website, and all this information is accessible through our technical assistance provider, TAP. And if you ever can't remember something from the webinar or have a question about something from the webinar, you can always email our contact tab. Okay, so let's begin. So the first thing you want to start, if you're a consortia lead, director, co-chair, or even the representative for your district, or even an administrator at a local school, you should be familiar with the education code that governs the adult ed program. We say CAEP, it used to be AEBG. Before that, it was, what was it before that? I forget. But anyway, we've gone through a couple of iterations of names. Currently, we're the California Adult Education Program, CAEP. Hopefully, we'll stay that way for a while. But the critical pieces, there's a lot of information between these sections, 84900 and 84920. So there's 20 sections that detail everything, and that's what the program's based on. And so if you haven't done already, it says in bold, we recommend you review the legislative overview webinar, which we've had posted, and I think we'll link to, but you can also review the ed code itself, and there's a link to that as well. So let's start with the fiscal management guide. And so that's a critical guide. It lists all the ways you can spend money, how money is allocated. We have a presentation on the overview for this guide. And so you can get that guide through that link right there listed. And so we've updated this. We haven't updated it in a while because things haven't changed that much. But when you go to the fiscal management guide, you'll see on the front cover when's the last time it's been updated and what was the thing that was changed. So I think the last thing we changed was travel, and that was about a year and a half ago. And so there's 15 sections. It covers everything from indirect to consortia expenditures to what's allowable, what's not allowable, and we'll get into that a little bit today. But this is a real good reference tool. It's on the website. You have the link there. So I suggest you get familiar with it. And if you have questions, like I said, related to allowable or unallowable costs, you can always contact TAP. So in addition to the fiscal management guide, we want to make sure that the legislation or the ed code for the California Adult Education Program doesn't supersede any current K-12 adult ed or community college education code or regulatory requirements. So if there's course approval requirements, if there's fiscal requirements, if there's reporting requirements, if there's teacher credentialing requirements, if there's teacher minimum quals requirements, anything like that that's in ed code or statute, that is in addition to the AB 104 legislation, and it supersedes whatever legislation we have. So that also goes for all the current financial processes and systems in place. So if your accounting office reports it through CDE's guidance on how to report their funds, that's how you're going to report these adult ed funds. Same thing with the colleges. We have the budget and accounting manual. You'll follow that the same way you do reporting other apportionment fund sources. And it lists here on the slide, California statutory codes, code of regulations, accounting code structure, and that would be for K-12 CDE, and budget and accounting manual, that would be for the community colleges, and any administrative or management policy memos or bulletins, which do come out on a regular basis. So we align with all those policy memos and bulletins as well. So just to be clear, you can't say, well, AB 104 and CAEP said this, so it's different than Ed Code or it's different than statute. We align with statute, so we would be under that statute. Okay, moving on to the first part of the fiscal management guide. It has a section on roles and responsibilities, and you can read through that of how we structured the California Adult Ed program. And then the second part is the funding process, which is kind of interesting. Gives a historical perspective from 4 years ago when we created the program and how we created the regional allocations. And so if you want to go back and look at that, the regional allocations were based on a K-12 certification of expenses from 12-13, which were about 67% of the allocation. And then the remaining 33% of the allocation was based on a funding formula, which is based on regional need. There were 6 regional needs based on census and American Community Survey data. And you can go to the link here if you want more details on that formula and what the data showed for each region. And it actually gets down to the number of individuals for each of those areas that we used in the funding formula that calculated that. And so that's good historical information. But moving forward, so based on that formula funding, we created allocations for all the regions in the state. There's 71. And every year we get an allocation from the governor through his proposed budget in January. We release that to you in February, and then you come back in May with the Consortia Fiscal Administration Declaration, which is due May 2nd. And that shows how you're allocating the funding to each of your members. And then shortly after that, the budget is enacted, voted on in June, the governor signs it in early July, and then the final allocation and apportionment schedule is released starting in August. And so that's now the last few years we've been given a COLA, an increase, and so we would know that when the governor releases the budget in January. There was a reduction this last year, and so we had to go back in and amend our CFAD, so that was a little tricky, and that happened in May. And so the budget cycle always has some surprises, but generally January is when they release the numbers. February is when we release the allocations in our system, in our NOVA system, which is our accounting system for the CAEP funds. And then May, you have meetings in March and April to determine who's going to get what. And then May, early May, first week of May, you submit those allocations to us. And then we wait to see if anything changes. If not, the governor signs or the legislature votes on it, and then the governor signs, and then we get that out starting in August. So that's kind of how the money comes to you. We'll talk a little bit more about when the money comes to your region, whether it's a fiscal agent or direct funded, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, so part 3 is about allowable uses of funds. And so just to be clear, you don't have to spend the funds in every single program area. So if your consortia or your district decides to offer ESL, high school diploma, and CTE, that's fine. If your district decides to offer adults with disability as the only program, that's fine. What you can't do is offer something that's outside of those 7 program areas, say like health and safety or home ec, something like that that's not one of the 7 program areas. I mean, you could offer it, but you just can't use the funds, the California Adult Education Program funds. So that's where these are restricted funds to those 7 program areas. If you want to get a list, I mean, it's the ASC, ABE, ESL, adults with disability, K-12 success, which is similar to parenting, but it's for elementary and secondary school children. And then we have short-term vocational, pre-apprenticeship, and workforce prep, used to be called workforce reentry. Okay, so a lot of people contact TAP to see, can I spend money here? Can I spend money there? And so just for the basics, in order to spend our CAEP funding, you must be a community college, county office, a joint powers authority, or a K-12 district in a regional consortia. So those are the members. And then the members must be located within the boundaries of the consortia. So the consortia were based on the community college district boundaries. And so you can't have a member that's outside that boundary. We do have a few members that straddle boundaries. And so that's an anomaly, but we do have a few cases like that. And then each consortia has a 3-year plan, which they just submitted for this year. It'll be good for 3 years. And then every year, based on that 3-year plan, they do an annual plan, an annual consortia plan. And then the members go in and do their work plan and budget for that year, which goes to the consortia at a public meeting for approval. So you have kind of 3 plans. You have your 3-year plan, which is your overall vision. You have your annual plan, which lays out the objectives that the consortia is going to be working on for the year, things they're going to be spending money on. And then the work plans are what the members come in and say, okay, of the 20 objectives in the annual plan, we're going to work on 5. And here are the 5, and here's my budget related to those 5. And then that goes up for approval at a public meeting, and then you start reporting your expenditures on a quarterly basis in NOVA. So we talked about it in the last slide. Funds may be expended in any of the 7 program areas. You must be aligned with the 3-year plan, the annual plan, the member work plan. And then this is a critical piece. All members shall participate in decisions along with expenditure decisions, but any kind of consortia decisions made by the consortia. And those are in a public meeting setting, so you have to do public notice, you have to make it accessible, those kind of things, all the Brown Act type requirements. And so that's available on our website as well. And so similar to your regular district public meetings, public notice, those kind of things, official reps. Other things you'll find in this section of the fiscal management guide is as far as allowable expenditures, they have to be reasonable and justifiable. You know, they have to be a part of those 7 program areas. Has to be based on, you know, the regional consortia member approval for allocation decisions. You can't delegate that to somebody else. It's based on those official member reps coming together and agreeing that these are going to be the allocation decisions for the region. Costs must be allocable to funding source activities. So that's where the program areas come in, and then activities within those program areas. The cost must be not replacing an existing fund source, so that's the supplanting issue. And so if you paid for this activity for this fund source for the last, 5 years, 10 years, and all of a sudden you're going to use CAEP funds, that would be a supplanting issue. And then there's also a Q&A section in this section of the guide that relates to allowable uses of funds. So you could check that out as well. So section 4 talks about leveraging funds. And so there's 6 fund sources that are required as far as members that get these fund sources would be part of a consortia, and they would report out via NOVA how they're expending these funds by program area. And so it says the legislation lists the state and federal sources that are required to be being a member of a consortium, section 84916 of the Education Code. So those are as follows: adults in correctional facilities, that's the K-12 jail funds. And those are for adults. I think we have about, I don't know, maybe a dozen or less programs in the state. We also have the WIOA Title II, which we have quite a few K-12 and community college members in that, grantees. Federal Carl Perkins, we have a lot of K-12 adult and community colleges in that. Local control funding formula, and that would be for K-12 or county office programs. Community college apportionment, and that would be for non-credit programming in those 7 program areas. And lastly, state funds for remedial education and job training for participants in CalWORKs. And so some of the K-12 adult schools get CalWORKs funds. Also, community colleges get that. Some of that goes to the non-credit programming as well. And so those type of fund sources would be reported in NOVA. And we have an exercise that you put estimates in by September 1st, and then you put actuals in by December 1st. And that's by program area, by fund source. We also add, in addition to these 6 fund sources, we have the CAEP funds, as well as any fees that you're charging and any in-kind contribution. And the definition of fees and in-kind aligns with the federal definition that you would use if you're a WIOA 2 grantee or if you're a Perkins funded organization. So it's based on those federal guidelines for fees and in-kind. So just a note on leveraging of CAEP funds for reporting purposes. CAEP is tracking students by program area regardless of funding source. Regarding of funding sources, adult education includes all people receiving instruction and services from CAEP consortium members are enrolled in K-12 adult ed or non-credit community college coursework in the 7 program areas listed in AB 104. So what this means is, let's say you have a CTE program and it's funded by another state grant or some other federal grant. We still want you to report those students to us for the California Adult Ed Program student data reporting. And so along with these other 6 fund sources, so any fund source that's in those 7 program areas that serves those students for instructional or service purposes, we'd like to collect student data on it. Now where it gets a little tricky is those community service programs, contract ed, because those don't follow the ed code in some cases. So teacher qualifications, credentialing, those kind of things. If they're outside the education code, then we would not be able to accept that data. So just be aware of that. We would accept any fund source and student data as long as they're following the teacher credentialing and MQs, as well as the education code statute regulation that goes along with that programming. Okay, part 5, speaking of fees, we do have policy on fees, and you can access that fee policy right now through that link. But just in a nutshell, no fees or no tuition may be charged or collected by community college non-credit programs or K-12 adult schools in the following programs: ABE, ASE, ESL, Adults with Disability, or K-12 Success. Colleges also cannot charge for non-credit CTE. There is an exception for K-12 CTE, and you can review the policy for that exception. So basically, non-credit cannot charge tuition fees. K-12 adult and county offices, they can charge fees for CTE, but that's it. And so you can go to that policy memo that lays this out. It's pretty clear. But But even if you're charging fees and you have that appropriate credentialed teacher or MQs, or I guess for K-12 it would be the appropriate credentialed CTE teacher, we still want to report that data into our CAEP reporting system for the K-12s. That's CASAS, and so hopefully your members are doing that. Okay, travel. So currently, travel is approved at the consortia or district level. So if you want to get your travel approved in advance, you should put that in your member work plan. And when that work plan and budget goes up at the beginning of the year for approval at a public meeting, then your travel is approved at the by the consortia, and all the members certify that. And so you must follow the district's per diem rates and policies regarding travel, as well as out-of-state travel. Out-of-state travel requires your consortia approval. That's why I would recommend putting it in your work plan, your annual plan at the consortia level, down to the work plan at the member level. That way you get it approved in a public meeting, even though the out-of-state travel might not be until the following spring. Out-of-country travel is not allowed. So travel does not have to go to the state, but it does have to get approved at the consortia level and by district level as well. You must do that in a public meeting setting. Either you can do it part of the work plan and budgeting approval process, or you can just schedule it on a public meeting agenda for approval. Okay, part 7 talks about effectiveness. So we have member effectiveness, and then we have consortia effectiveness. You can click on section 5 of the CAEP program guidance. It lists quite a few things for member effectiveness. If you look at Ed Code 84.920, it lists some data points that we're collecting to measure effectiveness, but it goes beyond just collecting how many people we serve, how many people have measurable skill gains and diplomas and GEDs and post-secondary certificates and jobs. So we look at more than that. And so there are 10 additional guidelines for member effectiveness. And for consortia effectiveness, we've broken it down into sections indicating evaluation of members, providing funding, governance, collaboration, membership, planning, and reporting. So all those are described out in detail. It would be good to get familiar with this document. And then your consortia should have a discussion about member effectiveness and consortia effectiveness. And so you could always use this as a reference tool. So here are the 10 additional guidelines on member effectiveness. So members have to participate and help complete the annual plan. They must expend funds within the 7 program areas and provide services that are consistent with the annual plan. They have to participate in completing and updating the 3-year plan. They also have to align their expenditures and use of California adult education plans with the objectives in the annual plan as approved by the consortia. They must participate in public meetings. They must participate in all the consortia decisions. They must report student level enrollment data and outcomes on a quarterly basis and at the end of the year for final reporting. They must share information on their programs offered and resources being used to support the programs. Those are the 6 funding sources that I mentioned earlier. They also must provide services that address the needs identified in the adult ed plan, and then they must file financial expenditures and progress reports on a quarterly basis in the financial reporting system, which is NOVA. Okay. So if you look at consortium member effectiveness, a lot of detail there, but the critical piece is back to member effectiveness. if you're going to reduce a member's funding for cause, you have to make sure that it's meeting the education code for that reduction. And so there are steps there that show what a consortium can do to reduce a member's funding depending on the finding or cause that led to that reduction. So that's important. Take a look at that, because that's the only way you can reduce a member's funding below the prior year amount. So if a member wants to, they can say, oh yeah, I'm not offering that program anymore. I don't need as much money. Go ahead, I'll take a 10% or a 50% cut. And that's fine. But let's say the member says, no, I need this money. And you say, well, you haven't filed any reports. You're late. You don't show up to meetings. We're going to cut you by this amount, or we're going to do some technical assistance first. And then if you don't, start doing what we want you to do, then we'll have to cut your fund. So there has to be some kind of intervention or assistance or technical assistance to help that member. But if they still can't become an effective member, then you can reduce their funds. And I would reference that Ed code or become familiar with that. Okay, part 8 on capital outlay. Now, capital outlay does not require state approval, but any kind of capital outlay you are required to inform the state through an email. So you would send it up to TAP, and they would forward it to the state CAEP office for review to see if they have any questions or if there are any of these activities would be prohibited. So just remember that if you are going to do some capital outlay, make sure you get it up to the state in advance, and so if they have any questions. But it's not an approval process, it's just to make sure the state's aware of what you're spending your capital outlay on. Okay, so part 9 talks about the consortium administrative function, and that's choosing between one of the parts of that administrative function is you have how to get the funding out. So are you a fiscal agent or are you direct funding? And so consortiums can choose between that. So a fiscal agent, the money goes to the fiscal agent, and the fiscal agent gives it out to the district. Direct funding is there's no fiscal agent, and the state gives the money directly to the district. And so if you do have a fiscal agent, there is a 45-day requirement, and we have that laid out in the instructions. And so they have to get those funds upon receipt. They have to get it to the district within 45 days. It's a pass-through, so it's not a reimbursable. The money has to go directly to the district. There can't be any holdback or anything like that. Here's a little bit more information on the 45-day trailer bill that you can become familiar with. You are not required to report the passing through of funds in NOVA. And so only the districts report their funds that they receive into NOVA. We don't report the pass-through. So a little more information on that. And then and that's in section 11. So going back to part 9, so a lot of questions come in about consortia administrative oversight. And this goes back to kind of that consortia effectiveness. And so here are the things that a consortia is required to do, where you can spend funds on. And so a little more detail is you can click on the program guidance for this. We have a lot of information on that. According to Ed Code 84913B, a consortia may use no more than 5% of funds allocated in a given year for the cost of administering the programs and the cost of the consortia. So the administrative limit is 5%, is calculated on the total allocation for the program year to the consortia. But that 5% can be lower if agreed upon by members, because in actuality, the members have to contribute to the payment of running the consortia. So usually whoever's the consortia lead or the district that's going to run the consortia, they put forth a budget to members and say, this is what we're going to do this year. This is the program director. This is how much they cost. We're going to have these meetings, these public meetings. We're going to have these work groups. We're we're going to put together the plan. We're going to do a regional needs assessment. So all this stuff goes in, and there's a cost factor. And so it has to be below 5% of the total allocation of the consortia. But based on those costs, then the members say, okay, I'll give up X amount, or they allocate certain funds to cover these consortia activities. So it's not like we have a separate pot for consortia activities. The running of the consortia comes out of the amount that goes to the members in that region. So the members have to somehow pool the funds or allocate a little extra to the district that's going to be responsible for doing these activities, and they have to agree upon that budget. A lot of good examples in this section that you can review of what is a administrative task versus what is a programmatic task. So things like running the program, marketing, those kind of things would be programmatic. Things like budget meetings, tying budget to planning, review of work plans, developing your 3-year plan. All that stuff is kind of related to administrative in nature. A little more detail on that. Okay, so for members now, don't get confused with that consortia limit. Members also can charge an indirect rate at their local district level. And so there's Ed Code 84913 as well that says K-12 districts and county office may use their CDE approved indirect rate for any CAEP proportion funds or 5%, whichever is less. So if you go to the CDE indirect rate website, which is listed here, and so this is 1920. When you go click on 1920, you'll see for your district what the indirect rate is for 1920. And if it's 3%, that's all you can use. If it's 8%, you can only use 5%. So whichever's less. So if it's in the example where it's 3%, you can only use up to 3%. The example where it was 8%, you can only use up to 5%. 5% is the cap. Same thing for community colleges. They can only use up to 5% as well, or whatever they have for the Code of Federal Regulations they've developed. That's usually higher than 5%. So usually they'll be at that 5% cap as well. All right, so part 12 is recording these funds in our financial systems. So community colleges have a different system than the K-12 and county offices. So you must follow those state and local financial system guidelines. And so I believe there's certain policies and regulations that govern how you report these. I know CAEP funds, there's Ed Code that says participating school districts have to deposit the adult education funds in a separate fund known as the Adult Ed Fund to be expended only for adult education purposes. So these are restricted funds. We also have fiscal management guide detail accounting requirements for how funds are treated by county office and K-12 districts. We also have a letter that went out from the Chancellor's office to community college districts on how to treat the adult education funds as well. And it includes separate reporting requirements for fiscal agents as well as direct funded members. So good details in this part 12, probably for your accounting people to get familiar with. And there's a lot of details on how to report this information into NOVA. That would include the plans as well as the budget as well as the expenditures. And so we have some YouTube videos, we have some webinars, and if you need more details or more information on this section of using NOVA, just contact TAP and they can connect you to a bunch of tutorials and self-help videos and information. Okay, part 14, examples of expenses allowed. So there's some coding that are in this section that shows how to use the reporting categories and types of activities and the account code structure, those kind of things. So might be something to look forward to for your accounting people, have a conversation about. They might already be doing this, so it could be something to familiarize yourself with. And then getting towards the end of this document, part 15, examples of expenditures not allowed. So we do have a few things that are not allowed. If you're paying for other staff salaries and benefits outside of these program areas, you can't do that. If you're paying political or professional dues or membership or contributions, if you're paying for travel that's not related to the 7 program areas, if you're paying for vehicles not allowed in those program areas, clothing that leaves the premises is a problem, entertainment costs or fines and penalties can be problematic. So that's kind of the end of the fiscal management guide. And so we do update it. Like I said, we haven't updated it in a while because we haven't had too many changes. But if there is a big change or something monumental, we'll send it out in the newsletter first to alert everybody, and then we'll come back and update the guide. So far, there hasn't, like I said, there hasn't been any major changes, but this is the process we would use. So let's see if there's anything else. So if you want to learn more, here are a couple links. We have the fiscal management guide. We have the Q&A. We have the Nova Fiscal System Q&A. All this is good information to get familiar with. We do have webinars that are recorded, and you can contact TAP to hear a archive version. And we do webinars throughout the year on upcoming deliverables. And so it's always good to listen in on those webinars, especially the chat where we get a lot of questions. And then, of course, this is how you would request support from TAP. If you go on our website, you can click on support request or request support, and this screen comes up, and you can type in your question, and they'll respond to you within, I think it's within the day, for providing you information or connecting you with resources. So with that, good luck if you're new to the program. We have a lot of, one thing I would say is network with your fellow regions. So at the consortia level, try to network with other directors in your region as well as other directors in the state. If you're at a district level, try to network with those administrators. And so we have different layers. We have the county offices, we have the community colleges, we have the K-12s, we have ROP programs, we have a few JPAs, which could be ROPs. So a lot of opportunity there. Some of these people have been around for a long time, and so it always helps to have kind of a mentor. So we would encourage that as well. And of course, you can always contact TAP if you get stuck or you don't know where to find something. And so we would encourage you to do that as well. So hopefully you enjoyed today. I hope this was informative, a lot of information. So feel free to access the website or go back through these slides and ask questions through TAP if something doesn't make sense or you need a clarification. So look forward to seeing you at upcoming events, and have a good day. Thank you.